and like went to went to physical therapy, went to chiropractors, surgeons, acupuncture, everything, physical therapists, and they seem to think um, the answer is like some clamshells and some bird dogs, and let's get your glutes activated. And like, really, like the answer is just building tolerance and building strength, just like you would with anything
Mhm.
else over a long period of time. So,
Mhm.
yeah, definitely a common misconception.
But it's an interesting conundrum in that I think the exercises that would specifically strengthen or make the vertebral muscles in the lower back more robust or to stop that pain cycle, I don't think we could attack that immediately. I think we had to build the structural resilience surrounding that area to then even be capable of pushing into getting the back more resilient and robust. Because what would happen is anytime you would load it, you're not strong enough to kind of support the lower erectors with the glutes, the hamstrings, the psoas, the hip musculature. And then what happens is they get overworked or over fatigued relative to what they're capable of handling. And even though you're not technically injured anymore, you keep getting the same pain response because your body's like, oh, you're working the lower rectors again. That means we're going to hurt our back. Get the fuck away, stop, lock down, create pain so you don't move anymore and we don't hurt. So it's almost like counterintuitive that you have to get stronger before then you can start getting the lower those um, less resilient areas to be strong to what am I trying to say to like then start training those areas.
Yeah. And there were definitely, I don't know if you remember, there were definitely weeks at a time um, where I was, where pain would just jump up.
Yep.
And I was like, Pete, what the fuck is going on?
Mm-hmm.
And it was just my my brain's response to, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
something that's uncomfortable.
And good on you for because as an athlete that's hard. Like I'm trying to go back and remember because it's been 2 years, but like as you're working through this stuff, you'll get kind of like dips and valleys and peaks and valleys of pain response week to week. Even when volume isn't changing much or intensities aren't changing much, like sometimes you might just get a weird pain response. And it's hard not to not only not pathologize that, but to like not freak the fuck out about it because you keep going, oh man, I keep running into roadblocks. And that's what people think of it as. They think that it's another hiccup, it's another step back. When in reality, it's a part of the process of moving forward. You just have to resign yourself to the fact that you're probably going to be in as much pain in the recovery process as you were in the injury process, or like very close to it in little peaks and valleys, right? And that we can't look at pain as the bad guy. We have to look at like the data set as a whole and function as our measures of how you're actually progressing. And it's like, dude, if a week before you had 400 pounds on your back and you were squatting just fine, and then there's no sign of acute injury, and the next week you have a pain response, I'm just saying that that's like, that's part of the process. Your body's just freaking out. You were maybe under some more stress, but that doesn't mean we need to like reset the whole process and go back to clamshells. It just means that we need to back off a little, get the pain response to go away, and then we just take one step back and keep making two steps forward, then one step back, two forward, one back, two forward, until we no longer have to keep taking steps back. That's how you get better, man.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Kira, what are your thoughts on this? I'm curious. As a PT.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm a physical therapist. So it's funny. I mean, not funny. I'm sorry that happened to you, but hearing about other PTs and how they handle injuries like this and pretty intense pain. Um, as soon as you said like clamshells, I'm sure they had you do banded like monster walks and a bunch of like pelvis and core stability,
Yeah.
which doesn't really do much of anything, especially for someone that's already like lifting weights or doing things that are way more challenging than that. Um, so it sounds like you and Peter did everything right as far as like building capacity. And sometimes too, especially with like pain like that, if you are someone that's already like lifting heavy, it can be a training load management issue where we need to build capacity at a lower intensity, but still at like a much higher intensity than what like traditional PT and other stuff is doing, because we need to build you back to like 100% and they're trying to rehab you at like 25%.
Right.
Yeah. That's my 2 cents.
Looking over at me because she's literally sitting right next to me.
I just didn't want to get off the comfy chair.
Yeah, I mean so the crazy thing for me is I just had 3 retards of strength coaches my whole career. And the first guy he's at Maryland now, the head football strength coach, making over $1 million a year. Like when we were coming in on like our developmental program, we were pulling from the ground 4 times a week. One day was cleans, and it was like 5x5, all of them.
Yep.
Cleans,
Yep.
clean pulls, trap bar deadlifts, snatch grip pulls.
Woof.
And like half our team had a bad back. And I'm like, dude, is this not, you're not seeing anything? Like, what do you think this is from?
Brother, you just got to get stronger. 5x5s on everything. You got to get strong with the barbell before you can do anything else. Nothing else matters in a barbell.
Yeah. He was a fucking idiot. Our speed, we would get 1 speed day a week, and it would be like 10:40s with 45 seconds rest.
Jesus
That
Christ.
was our speed day, and like run over some mini hurdles and shit. I'm like, you're an idiot.
I mean, man, I'm as I'm getting older, I start to like I think come more in alignment with like a lot of old school methods, right? I can understand why, like, just fucking train hard, just move more weight, just train hard, just sprint fast. Like there can be a lot of over intellectualizing of strength conditioning, I think. But there is a reason why we have advanced as much as we have, and why athletes are healthier and stronger and faster and performing better than they were 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50 years ago. And it's because a lot of the methods of developing athletes, also paired with a lot of our sport training, second to our strength conditioning training, has improved. We are measuring metrics, and we're like, if you look at most of the big like SEC teams, Big 12 teams, all wear trackers on their pads. They're all wearing heart rate monitors. They're all wearing fatigue trackers. They all have nutritionists. They all have. So like, why is strength conditioning still in like the dark ages in a lot of ways, in a lot of programs where you have guys that are like, oh, well, you're getting tired on these 1040s. You're just being a pussy. You're just, you need to try harder. You don't need to drink water. Water's for cowards. Like, even those ideas like literally still exist, which is wild to me. But that's the problem with that old school mentality of like, you can recover from anything. You can't overtrain. Overtraining, I heard the most ridiculous shit I've ever. It's really hard for me to not get drawn into these like Instagram posts that are specifically designed to elicit a response out of the person. But like some guy just posted about how like deloading is not a thing, and overtraining doesn't exist, right? Overtraining is only under recovery. It's the dumbest shit I have ever heard in my life, because the only people that say that are people that have never actually trained hard. They're the people that are like, oh, you can't overtrain. Okay, let me go do a bodybuilding session with you and see you go to an RIR 0 on every exercise for the next 8 weeks with like 7 sets on everything. And let's see if you can overtrain. I bet we can get there. I just like, these guys don't understand that like overtraining is very real. We have evidence surrounding it. We know it comes like anecdotally, we've all felt it. So like, anyways, I'm this is me getting excited by that fucking post, but this is what happens. This is what happens.
Oh, he also didn't believe in deloads. So there's that.
See my fucking, thank you. That's my fucking point. These same guys, they're all the same guy. They all wear West Side Barbell t-shirts and sweatshirts. They all wear Nike Monarchs and Costco jeans, and like they have bad, shitty, faded tattoos. And they talk about how back in the day everyone worked harder and was stronger. And it's like, no, they weren't. That's not true. You're just like making those memories seem great because you're old and your life sucks. That's why.
Yeah.
All right,
Go on your soapbox.
I'm done ranting. Fuck. I was actually going to talk about some shit today, some important shit.
That is important shit.
It is important shit. Okay, so I had a couple different topics, but one of them I think that was important that I wanted to kind of cover with Jack and Xander specifically, because I knew you guys would be here. But Kira was mentioning how we talked about exercise intent, right? So not even just exercise intent, but like session intent. So like how you approach a session and then the exercises in it will really like plays a big role in not only the outcome, but in your own like mental, I guess you could say mental health, like your mental like barometer of like good and bad days. It can play a big role in kind of keeping you sane session to session. So what we were in a session together, and Kira was we were snatching, right? So we were both snatching together. And I think I was coming at it where like I'm kind of chill and relaxed and like just I don't care if I miss. Kira before every lift was like getting all fucking fired up for like very, very easy snatch plus 3 overhead squats, right?
Which, in my defense, if any of you,
Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to. My bad.
he just muted me.
Are you unmuted now? Yeah,
Yes.
you're unmuted.
In my defense, if any of you have worked with Peter for any amount of time, he just writes volition on things. And so I was like, okay, I need to approach this with volition. So I'm like, intent. I'm like, lifting, we're doing this. Please continue.
And I was saying that I think there are certain sessions where it is required to have a high level of arousal and a high level of volition, and where you should be attempting to not only get into a flow state, but you should be really attempting to like not miss in the session and bring the most that you can to every single lift from the first time you touch the bar to the last lift, right? But in a session like that we were doing, which was mostly practice, anytime you're doing a variation of the lift plus reps, you're not maxing out on a snatch, a 2+3 with an overhead squat. Like you're doing 5 reps. You're so far from specificity of moving the heaviest load possible and maxing out your snatch that like, why not approach it in a way, because it's a practice, because it's developing other traits other than just making me better at snatching, why not approach it as a more playful session, right? Like the difference between if you're going to shoot baskets, right? Or you're going to throw the football around and work on running routes, your goal isn't to be perfect. Your goal isn't to run the most perfect route every time. Your goal is to make the route better. And every time you run it, work on things and work on cueing and work on, okay, maybe if I step like a foot shorter and I cut here, rather if I cut at the 5-yard line rather than the 4-yard line, and if I wait till my man is a couple yards off me or whatever it might be, if you look at it as like a play session and you have fun with it and you're okay with making mistakes, you're able to learn more, right? That's how learning happens, whether it's physiological or neurological. Like that's how motor learning happens. And so in a session like that, if we can like take the weight off, so we don't make the approach to every lift this like, I gotta fucking get hyped up for my 135-pound 2 snatches and 3 overhead squats. Because then when you do miss, or if you do miss, or if you don't perform the way that you were like, you don't perform your absolute best, you're not disappointed. You're able to reframe it and look at it as like, oh, I'm practicing. So if I miss, I can step back and go, okay, why did I miss? What happened? It feels, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it feels much more relaxed, which then takes the weight off, which then allows you in the sessions where you need to bring the fucking heat, it allows you to do that. and it creates a contrast. Kira?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. That was the gist. So for Jack and Xander, for you guys, this is a pertinent point. So Jack, you're in prep right now, right? So most sessions, oh, we got more people coming in. Cool. So most sessions you're doing right now, you need to bring the heat, right? There's very few practice sessions, okay? But as we get out of prep and we get back into like your GPP phase, or let's say we're at 12 weeks out, or we're at 8 weeks out even, if you try to bring that level of intensity for that long, if you're saying like, okay, I'm in prep, I'm starting prep, and I want to bring the same intensity on week 12 that I'm going to bring on week 1, I just don't think many people, unless they're a professional athlete, are capable of bringing that for every session, every day, every exercise, and every lift. So if we can gauge that intensity and measure it better, and then we can reframe things. So like, let's say your first session of the week is a heavy squat. So like you're programming right now, you've got, actually pull it up right now. You're programming right now, you're starting the week with your heavier lifts, and then you're ending the week with more of your like your SBD or your practice sessions, right? So for you at like 10 weeks out, you had the first session of the week was like a squat, you had a single, like an RPE 6, 7, 8, or 9, followed by some back off work. That's the session where I want you to bring a high level of arousal, a high level of intensity. If you're gonna take a pre-workout, that's the day you're gonna take it. For people that are taking drugs, if you're taking like an anadrol or an androgen, that's where you would take it on that session. Like that is the day where you need to bring the fucking heat. On day 4, when you're hitting a 5 rep 0 acceleration squat at 50% of your max, or when you're doing stiff legged deadlifts as a secondary deadlift movement, I don't need you to get fucking hyped up, right? I need you to focus on what the intent is. And the intent for those 0 acceleration squats is to build neurological patterning, motor patterning, so that then the following squat session, when you go into squat heavy again, you can squat perfect without having to think. That's the idea behind that. My really long-winded explanation of saying this is that you can create session to session different intents, and then you can better approach lifting as a whole, and you'll have better success across every session. Amber, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was going to chime in. I also think that I agree with you on that one, Peter, for sure. Definitely, like there is a time to get amped up, and singles are the time to do that. For one example, for me, like I squat before I deadlift, and so what I've had to really work with over these last few blocks is kind of amping myself up for deadlifts, but not for my pause squats, because like they're an RPE 6. Like if I go over that, it's kind of silly. It doesn't make any sense. I'm just taking away from what I'm going to get out of my deadlift later. So really kind of like ebbing and flowing throughout your session from exercise to exercise. In the off season as a power lifter, if I have like hack squats, I'm going to go balls to the wall on my hack squats, and I'm probably going to undershoot my squats a little bit because like the purpose of that block is to get bigger. So hack squats are what's going to do that for me better than back squats, right?
Yes.
So that's kind of my thought too, is like being able to kind of ramp it up and down throughout your session too, knowing like if I want to have big shoulders, I'm going to hit my delts hard, but maybe like my back exercises, I'm not going to get as amped up or aroused.
Well, and even for like as you approach your pause squats, right? Like
yeah,
in that session itself, your deadlift is the main exercise in the session, right? That is the thing that you're trying to drive those strength adaptations for specifically, would be the deadlift. So your pause squat is looked at as like either a maintenance. Hey dad, I'm gonna mute you. So your pause squat is looked at as like a maintenance, right? Why is he not muted? There it is. Okay. So your pause squat is looked at as like a maintenance, right? So why is this not going away? So we want like the arousal within that lift to not be nearly as high. We want the approach to that lift to be like, oh, I'm coming into this to maintain, maybe I'll work on some technical stuff. And so like, let's say you miss groove. If you miss groove is basically just you technically were off in the lift, right? Like you did something wrong. Your footing was wrong. You leaned too far forward. You didn't brace correctly, whatever happened, right? In that specific session, it's not as important because like, dude, I don't really care if you miss groove, like, and you can look at it as a learning opportunity. Whereas in the deadlift, like you really want to be on, and if you fuck that up, you kind of screw the whole session. So you can change your mental approach to almost like allowing yourself to be okay with making mistakes in some sessions, and then in others, forcing yourself to be fucking on. That's the big idea. Okay. All right. So next topic. Babe, did you have anything that you wanted to talk about?
Let me unmute myself. Had to unmute myself so I didn't get muted again. Yeah, so as a physical therapist, obviously I work with athletes and people who get injured all the time. And I've had injuries myself. So I thought something that might be helpful to talk about for everyone here was discussing the difference between muscle, nerve, and joint pain, and like how to kind of self-identify and what to do about it. Not like a super long or really involved topic, but just to give you the highlights. If it is something more muscular, it's going to feel a lot more like that dull, achy, kind of like lingering pain. Typically, if you have like a muscle strain that's like an acute, like I just pulled my hamstring, obviously that's going to feel a little bit sharper and worse. But generally speaking, muscle pain is usually more of the like dull, achy pain. If you're having this type of pain, this is a great time to be doing kind of what we talked about earlier about building your capacity at a lower intensity. So it's never, and I don't think anyone in this group would do this, but it is never, hardly ever a good idea to entirely rest if you have an injury, because we still need to be building the capacity of your body to handle load, and just resting and hoping it goes away is not going to make you better able to go back and handle those loads. So that's like a very general overview for muscles themselves. Obviously, if you have like an acute, like I just pulled my hamstring, that's not the best time, like that same day, to be immediately loading it. I would probably give it like a day or two, and then I would start doing really light isometrics, meaning like a glute bridge or something that's like very low level, but you're still getting some load on the hamstring, because we want to promote healing of the tissues. And for the love of God, do not take ibuprofen or aspirin or any anti-inflammatory if you have an injury within the first like 72 hours. The reason for that is, and I'm sure a bunch of you do, the reason for that is, if you take something anti-inflammatory, like right after you get injured, the inflammatory process exists to heal your tissues. So like all of the cells, the macrophages, everything is going to that area to heal what's wrong. If you take an anti-inflammatory, you're going to slow down that process. So if you can tolerate the pain, even try and avoid using ice, because again, that's going to slow down the inflammatory process. So if you can use things like heat, if it feels tolerable, great. If you can wait even like 2 days, it will help you heal much faster. That's just an aside. But so yes, acute muscle pain, we want to load it within the right time frame. If you're having like anything that's like shooting pain, if it is burning, if there's numbness or tingling, that's going to be a little bit more nerve pain. Those ones you want to be a little bit more careful about, because so a lot of times, like, you know, the whole no pain, no gain does kind of apply for muscle pain sometimes, but nerve pain, hardly ever. Nerves are super sensitive. So if we're just continuing to push into pain, how many of you have had like any sciatic type pain? Yes. So I'm sure what people told you to do is like, just go home and stretch. Don't do that. The only reason I say that is nerves don't want to be stretched and held the same way that muscles do. So if you have like a sciatic and you're like, I just have tight hamstrings, like I need to stretch my hamstrings. Not the case. If you do have any kind of nerve irritation or injury, obviously the nerve is getting irritated somewhere along the path. So what we want to do instead is something called nerve glides, where you're basically like, for example, let's say like I'm getting numbness or tingling in my hand. An easy thing I can do is a nerve glide for my upper body. So that's going to look like here. And I'm literally just putting my hand down with my shoulder blade down. So I should feel tension like in these 3 fingers. And I'm just going to go till I feel tension and then come off of it. So I'm literally going to do like 10 or 12 reps of these guys. And for probably all of you, if you did that right now and like stuck your arm out to the side, bring your shoulder blade down, put your palm down, you're going to feel some pulling in your hand. Just as like a prehab, if you're interested, that's a great one to do. Nerve glides for your upper body, especially if you ever get like numbness and tingling, like when you bench, or if you're like using any of your upper body muscles and you're feeling that way, probably a good idea to do that. If the nerve glide itself doesn't help make the nerve pain go away, that's when I would say try and find someone in your area, or you can contact me or Peter and we can help you figure out what more of the root cause is. But nerve pain, I would be a little bit more cautious of like ignoring it, because if you have in the past and you just keep doing what you're doing, you've probably felt it get worse and it feels terrible. So that's that on nerve pain. Joint pain tends to be a little bit different than both of these. It can be hard to figure out because it does tend to have either like dull or achy or more of that like sharp stabby. There's a couple different things that can happen with joints. One of them is loose bodies. So this is literally where like you have little chips of bone that come off and they're like existing in the joint. So if you're having like crazy swelling every time you do an exercise, if the pain doesn't go away no matter what you're doing, that would be a time that I would say like probably worth going to at the very least get an x-ray, see what's going on in the joint itself to make sure there's not a bony injury. If it's something that's more like like my knees get really achy, but then once I start lifting, then like I feel good, that's a time where we could definitely take more of an active approach and just give you the right loading to improve your joints capacity. Because the other thing too with joints, if we want to make any changes in the joints, especially if we have any damage to the meniscus or the cartilage or anything like that, we actually have to load it to make those changes. If you're not loading it, you're not getting the like stress response from compressing the tissue and then forcing it to get better. But again, I'm not worried about this group not loading things. I think we'd be more on the spectrum of potentially overloading things, which basically no matter what your problem is, unless it's like serious nerve pain, isometrics, meaning just a hold, is going to be your best friend. If you're doing them unweighted, I would start 2 to 3 sets of like 45 to 60 seconds, which I know sounds like a lot, but that is like what's actually going to induce the adaptations that we're looking for. And then once that gets easier, then that I would start adding weight. And even with like tendinopathies, which I hope none of us are using the word tendinitis. This is a really silly little thing, but like the word itis literally means inflammation. And some people have tendinopathy, which is a more broad term of like tendon irritation. And when we're using the word itis, it means like acute inflammation, which we don't know. Like I don't have MRI vision to look at your tendon and tell you that it's like immediately swollen, but I can tell you it's irritated. So tendinopathy, just for all of you, tell your friends. But if we're in the stages of tendinopathy, especially when we're approaching like really high irritation tendinopathy, we're actually talking about loading at like 80% of your 1 rep max, but in a hold. So in order to actually like overcome the tendon's pain, we have to make its capacity so high, which is why we have to load it the right way. And for a lot of us that are lifting regularly, we can get to a place where our muscle tissue, like especially for someone like Peter, we've talked about this before. I hope you don't mind me talking about, okay, cool. He's had some issues, specifically in his knees where he's having like very kind of typical tendon pain. For someone like him that has added a bunch of tissue to his body that biologically does not exist, like he has used things to help him add tissue. Now his muscles have a higher capacity for load that his tendons have not had the like time to adapt to, if that makes sense. So especially if you're using
she's talking about performance enhancing drugs that allow me to add musculature at a faster rate than my body would naturally be able to, which then far surpasses the rate at which my tendons
can adapt.
can adapt to match that.
Makes sense. So especially if you're on any kind of PEDs, isometrics are going to be like your best friend as part of your basically building process. Does all of that make sense? Any questions about that, or any questions about any like injuries you have? I'm happy to discuss.
Okay.
Everyone feels amazing?
I
Hell
feel
yeah.
like shit. My Achilles and my knees, but the nice thing is that I've got you here.
Yeah.
But actually it's a good segue. Is that I've been dealing with knee and Achilles issues for probably the last like 6 months, and it's mostly my fault, right? So this is where if we look at the cycle of injury and like how it develops, this is usually how it happens for most athletes, right? So I went from basically doing no running or sprinting of any kind for years and years and years to trying to like fast track my way in a year and a half into being able to run and sprint and jump the same way I did in college, maybe 10, 12 years ago. Old. Um, the problem with that is when we try to rush a process, and also when you are already a athlete that likes to work hard and is used to that level of work and associates that level of work with making progress, it's really hard to go, all right, I'm going to start with 3 40-yard sprints at like 30, like a literal jog. And then from there, I'm going to progress that to a 40% sprint, and then 50, 60, 70, and 80. And then once I get to around 80%, I'm going to start broadening my volume, and doing that over months and months and months. It's really hard to have the control to want to do that, especially when you've been capable of these things in the past. So what happened to me is I went way too hard, way too fast, and I developed some chronic patellar meniscus pain in both knees, and my left side Achilles is just kind of bunged up. It just feels like I wake up in the morning on most days and it's sore and achy and just takes time to kind of get to feel right and loadable. Now I started to make it get better. And then I decided,
Isometrics.
with lots of yeah, I had tons of isometrics. I was doing lots of eccentric loading. And then I was able to get to a point where with the sprinting and running and jumping and stuff, I was able to handle that for the most part. Then I decided, I think CrossFit would be a great idea to jump into with no like gradiated loading. I'm just going to jump into programming written by my buddy and start doing CrossFit. Hey, my knees said, we don't like that. My Achilles said, we don't like that either. And guess what? My shoulder said the same thing too. So I think at this point, I had finally learned my lesson. And I got about 2 weeks into that block of training and I went, I can feel stuff coming on in the same way because I'm not choosing to have the self-control to regulate my training in the way that I would with any of my other athletes. So what I did, I backed off. I cut my volume down to, I have 2 Metcons a week where I've written them in a way where it is a gradiated and increasing amount of stress with not only each round, but then with each week as I add on to that so that I can handle those increases in volume. I added in eccentric and isometric work, and I backed off of other work so that I'm essentially starting what would be considered like lower than a deload volume on almost everything. And I'm giving myself a long runway to build into it while also maintaining on the back end isometric work and slow eccentric work so that I can maintain the tendinal resiliency and stay healthy as I push into these kind of new domains. So for you guys, that kind of the circuitous lesson in that is that if you want to do anything new, in my opinion, it is very, very, very rare and very difficult to create a person or a body that is capable of doing any task or modality they like to with no ramp up period. So if you want to avoid injuries for the most part, for like the rest of your life, outside of acute tears, strains, or like damage, right? Outside of that, if you want to really limit chronic injuries for the rest of your life, just give yourself a really, really, really long runway and start at like a quarter of what you think you want to do, maybe even an eighth of the workload you think you want to do on week 1 and give yourself a nice runway to build into that. Because if you have the patience to do that, by week 6, 7, and 8, you're going to be training at a full capacity. You're going to be competent at the thing. You're going to have given yourself enough time for neurological and motor learning, and your joint and tendinal and connective tissue structures are going to be capable of handling the loading you're giving. So then you don't end up with a bum hamstring or a bad back or a bad shoulder that doesn't ever go away, because that's the other problem. And this is the next piece. Injuries that don't go away are your own goddamn fault. It's not your body fighting against you. It's you never giving your body a chance to actually heal. This leads into, I watched a really good talk by Jill Cook, who's like one of the foremost experts or academics on.
She's the tendon queen.
She's the tendon queen. She's like the expert on lower limb tendinopathy. Okay. She was talking about the return to injury cycle, which I think I'll let Kira explain. But most people, they always get to that point of pain free, but pain free is not injury free. It's not like, okay, now we return to play at full speed. And that's the mistake most people make. Kira, do you mind just walking us through kind of the return to injury or the return to play?
I think you're muted.
What'd you text me? Oh, okay.
Can you share that or like hold it up?
Yeah, I can actually email it to myself.
I just sent Peter, because there's a really helpful graph that literally talks about, but essentially the point of the graph is, just because, let's say you like have pain, just because the pain has gone away, it does not mean that the tissue is healed. So then it's this vicious cycle of, oh, I have pain, I'm going to pull back or rest or do whatever. And then, oh, the pain went away. So like, oh, I'm good to go. And then you go back to doing the thing you were doing. And then whoop, pain comes back because the tissue hasn't healed yet. And so a lot of the times people aren't giving your body enough time to either adapt to overcome the injury, adapt to not have an injury because you actually gave yourself enough time to do the sport, or it's just this vicious cycle of, oh, well, the pain went away, so I went back to what I was doing, but I went back to it at a lower level. And so I'm still not letting the tissue heal fully, but it's not enough of the stimulus to cause pain to restart. Does that make sense? So like that's how people then have chronic pain, because that's also, there's a whole part of pain science where like, okay, you also mentioned, Jack, having a bad back. There are plenty of people that are like, I just have a bad back, or I'm broken, or this or that. And it's like, okay, what was your original injury? Let's say you slipped a disc or you pulled the muscles in your back. That is not still an active tissue problem 10 years later. Like the healing timeline in your body, there is like physiologically no way that you could still have the exact same injury with no like healing that went on in the last 10 years. Your body just doesn't do that. Your body is going to fix things. But people stay in pain because then they start telling themselves that they're broken, or it's that vicious cycle where like every time you go back to training, oh, I pulled my back again, or like, oh, I got that same back pump, or like, oh, I just can't deadlift anymore. That's not how your body works. You're just not giving yourself either enough time at the right loading capacity, or you're just resting and doing nothing and then going back to doing the thing and then surprised when it still hurts.
Okay.
Did you find the graph?
Yep, I'm gonna share my screen really quick.
I think it's also really helpful to have this graph if you guys want to screenshot or whatever to show other people to have the same conversation, because it's easy to talk about like the concept of it, but actually seeing the graph I think helps. So hopefully we can see it.
What the fuck?
You're sharing, I think you're just sharing like your screen.
Why is my what is happening right now? Sorry guys. We're having technical difficulties.
Here, I wonder if I can put it in the chat.
No, it should be able to open. Here we go. Okay. Now we're gonna go show screen. Sorry, guys. I'm technically.
I'm sending in the
And
chat
that-
also. I sent it, so if you want to see
Here we
it.
go. Can everybody see this?
It's not up yet. There we go. Yeah.
Okay. This is
This is your like level of pain, the total tissue damage, and then time is the bottom. So you can see if we start on the left, the period of quote unquote abusive training. So even that, like there's the threshold is the dotted line for when you're actually going to feel pain. You're having all of this like tissue damage happen even before you feel pain. So by the time you felt the pain, your tissue damage is like through the roof. That's a great question. Do you want me to field this one from Xander in the chat?
Yeah.
He said, how can we actively recover from injury, especially in physically demanding occupations that don't really give you the downtime for that recovery period? That is a fabulous question. And I would say part of it is doing everything you can outside of your work to optimize your recovery. So like looking at your nutrition, looking at your sleep, because have you guys heard of the term allostatic load? Yeah. So basically,
pretty changed.
yeah, so basically allostatic load is looking at like all of the load on your body, whether like your physiological stress and the psychological stress and your sleep and your nutrition and like everything else basically that is going on in your life. So for people that are like paid professional athletes, they pay for people to manage the other things like nutrition and setting their schedule and getting like their work stuff done so that they have way more capacity for a super high physiological stress. They pay for like mindset coaches and sports psychologists and all this stuff to manage because your body doesn't differentiate between physical and psychological stress. It gets the same like stress signals. So if you have a job that is going to require a ton of you physically and probably is like long days and you're not able to get a lot of sleep, I would do everything that I possibly could to make sure that while you're at work, whatever you're having to do physically, you're doing it with like the best possible form, which I know is not always easy or available, but that would be like anything basically at work that you can control.
So
I would try and control. And then outside of work, obviously trying to
To-
mitigate.
to give some insight, real quick, sorry to interrupt, but to
Yeah,
give some
no.
insight to understand what Xander is specifically talking about. Xander is going to be going back into the Army and doing like RASP training, RASP and then Ranger School to go back to become a Ranger, correct, Xander? Give me a thumbs up. Yep. Okay. And so because of that, I think that this is where the opportunity to control variables like that becomes really difficult when you're sleeping in the mud, eating MREs, putting Tabasco in your eyeballs to try to stay awake at night. Like that's what these dudes are doing, right? And so that's where I think what you're saying, it just becomes even more important that like when you have opportunities to do things like, dude, I mean, you're in a barracks or you're lying down in the field and you're just doing nothing, right? Like you got downtime. There's no matter what, there's some downtime. Dude, lie on your fucking back, put your ass in the air and do some hamstring isometrics. Your shoulder starts to bug you, hold a push-up position for 20, 30, 40 seconds and build some accumulated isometric time through the shoulder, right? Like that's where you do have the opportunity when you can't manage sleep, when you can't manage the nutrition because you're only getting what you're getting. You could still manage your response to stress. You could literally, bro, if you got 5 minutes, put your feet up on your bed or on your ruck, close your eyes and give yourself 2 minutes of breathing drills to calm your nervous system down. That's 2 more minutes than you had that you might not have had, right? And if you have any downtime, you can work on isometrics. If you have any time to go to the gym, you might not, but you could even you could grab your ruck and put it on your feet and do some like isometric leg extensions or something. Like there's so many things that you could get inventive with that I think those little pieces would accumulate to like the difference between you staying healthy and not having like shin splints and Achilles tears and patellar issues and the difference between you having those things and not having.
So
I
just
would
time
also add to that
up
that
with that.
specifically for isometrics, especially if you're doing them like just body weight, it is almost impossible unless you're holding it for literally the entire day to be doing too much that you are like adding to the negative amount of load on your body, if that makes sense.
Xander, you were going to say something?
Well, my mic's working now, but no, now that it's working, the question with that, so to better explain it, so yes, we're not going to have much time for that. There's a lot of constraining variables and stuff like that, but so yes, prehabbing prior existing injuries already, but then looking at it, it's like we already know the injuries are going to come. Shit happens in the field. You're tired. You're going to accidentally step in a hole and twist an ankle. It happens all the time. But being able to go, hey, how do I actively manage this injury while still having to be out there for 14, 15 more days? Then I'll get like a week down, recovery, do it again. So being able to be like, hey, how can I manage every asset at my disposal so that I can fix that injury and still be able to execute my job?
Okay, one other thing I would say, just based on like, this is just general rules for any acute injury. So if you were like in the field, and I know I'm telling you not to use ice or ibuprofen or any of that stuff,
Yeah.
heat would be great. Any type of compression would also be great. We do want to allow for some swelling, but especially like an ankle sprain, we're not trying to let that joint like blow up, right? Because you still need to be able to move it. So even just I would say things to keep on you if you can, like an ace bandage to just be
Mhm.
able to up if you need to at any time. And then the other thing we want to do is try and keep things moving because our body, obviously we need to like circulate everything within our body. But the
Mhm.
other thing the body does when you have that inflammatory process is it's going to take all of the it basically is going to like eat all of the injury and then we need to take that waste product and shuttle it. So the best thing you can do is try and keep things moving with as little pain as possible. Try not to push into sharp pain, dull achy pain, fine. Start doing isometrics, and then just like wrap the joint and try
Mhm.
and tolerate movement the best you can. That's what I would say for like super acute injury.
Okay.
Would you say like so would you say that like in the field when you don't have a lot of control over the volume of work you're going to be doing,
Mhm.
what could you add in? Like, let's say you sprain an ankle, or you twist your knee, or you go to grab something, your shoulder gets tweaked. Would you say isometrics would be probably the best bet to then just kind of
It would
like
definitely be something that, like, if I could sneak them in here and there, like before I fall asleep or like right when I'm getting up and putting my boots back on. But for the most part, how injuries are usually dealt with in that situation is pull your boots tighter and take like 1,000 milligrams of ibuprofen.
yeah, yeah. So then you might be able to kind of have an edge on people if you
Mhm.
understand, if you can put together actually, and I'll do that. I mean, the nice thing is I'm your coach and she's my girlfriend. So, um, but I'll put together like basically like a cheat sheet. So
Okay.
like if you feel an injury or something happens, like how can you not only attack it immediately, but then how can you manage it as you're progressing? Because like, dude, yeah, you sprain an ankle, you got to keep running on it. But then what can you do in any downtime you have to be
Mhm.
able to at least, you might not be healing the injury, but you might
Yeah.
at least get yourself to function for long enough to then get downtime and then heal the injury.
Mm. Makes sense.
Yeah. So remind me before you leave, remind me of that and we'll write that up for you.
Yeah,
Put
that's
together like
perfect.
a little
Thing is, you got to take RIR out of my program whatsoever because you always got 5 reps in reserve until you got none left.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Yeah. But I mean, that's the tough thing about like you military guys, man. Like you're taught that go hard in everything you do, which is like, I mean, dude, like when it's life or death, like there's no like RAR 2 to 3. It's RAR 0 in everything you do all the time because that's kind of how you have to approach this stuff, right?
And I won't even say it's military. I'd say it's just personality in general.
Okay. Okay.
That's my biggest thing. And the thing that drives me nuts is, again, you'll put like RIR 2 to 3, and I'm like, I know I could do 5 more. I know I could do like 2 more or even more than that. And then I'm
Yeah.
like, Next thing you know, I'm at failure, and I'm like, but I thought I could do 2 more reps.
Your mental capacity is outweighing your physical capacity.
Yes, yes. So, and that's where like there are flaws in the RAR and the RPE system, right?
Okay.
Because you don't have to use RAR. If you
Mhm.
wanted to, like in the sense of if you're doing hypertrophy work, right?
Yeah.
You can train to failure on every exercise you do. It just lowers the total amount of volume that you can handle. And there's we could make arguments about efficiency of progress over time, but I
Mhm.
really don't think there's going to be a significant difference in someone training to RAR 0 or RAR 3210 deload. I don't think there's going to be a significant difference in progress if all of the variables are controlled and volume is made relative to what the task is and how much and what we're doing. The reason why RAR training at RAR 3210 and then deloading and resetting works well is because it gives us another metric or form of progression. So like each week you're increasing reps, you're probably increasing intensity in some way, but you're also saying you're able to increase effort, which is like increasing RPE, which is another metric that can be progressed that we can use for progressive overload.
Mhm.
But you don't have to use it. It's just, in my opinion, an efficient model. But if we just reduce the total volume you're doing and we say, all right, dude, every time you go in the gym, I want you to bring the fucking heat. We can do that. We just have to make sure that on the back end, you're recovering for each session so that you can keep making progress week over week, right?
Mhm.
That gets into like coaching and not marrying yourself to a system and understanding how athletes work, right? Because I mean, dude, that's just again, you talk to most pro athletes and like, or most pro bodybuilders. You try to tell them to train to an RAR 2 to 3, and they're going to go, "What the fuck are you talking about? I'm going to train to failure." Because
Mhm.
it's not only is it easier, but it's usually just people that want to work hard want to work hard. That's
Okay.
kind of that's part of kind of a personality trait thing. So don't think that just because you don't want to do that, that's like you're a failure on your part, or like that's the only way to approach training. Because on the other
Mhm.
end, dude, if you only wanted to train to an RAR 4 for the rest of the time that you train, you're still going to make progress. So it's just whatever system works best for you. Okay. Cool, guys. It is noon, so I gotta get going. I've got a mentorship call, but I'm very glad you all came on. Thank you for hopping in, and next week I hope to see you guys all show up too. Cool. All right, Xander, Amber, Jack, Aiden. See you guys later.